Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Schizophrenic Kiev. Ukraine has a new president, but he has made it clear he has no new ideas on how to resolve the country's dire problems. Poroshenko says he wants a peaceful Ukraine, but in his inaugural address, he issued a declaration of war and an ultimatum. Whose agenda is he pursuing? To CrossTalk, the crisis in Ukraine, I'm joined by my guest, Vladimir Suchan in Cleveland. He is a professor and former Czechoslovak diplomat. In Boston, we have Daniel Patrick Welch. He is a writer and political analyst. And in Moscow, we cross to Mark Slobode. He is a senior lecturer and researcher at Moscow State University. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules. In effect, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Let's go to Cleveland first. Ukraine has a new president, but he has no new ideas. Vladimir, what do you make of what Poroshenko has said on the back of his trip to Normandy?
Many people were hopeful that Poroshenko coming into office would turn the page or would make certain breakthroughs possible. And as many other people, more realistic, were afraid and expected, Poroshenko reaffirmed the program, which is a full-scale war on eastern Ukraine, without any qualms, without any quarters given, and he essentially wants that eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, submit, surrender, and disarm. And for Poroshenko and his patrons, this would be peace or pacification. In history, we know that certain powers were calling for peace or pacification, and by that, they often meant extermination, war, and removing any resistance or any dissent that stands in the way. And this is the case right now.
Okay, Daniel, what do you make of it in Boston here? Because I keep seeing these windows of opportunity closing. And Poroshenko is making it very, very clear that the people of the East, and I want to stress on this program, the anti-Kiev folks, not the pro-Russian folks, because that's an illusion, the anti-Kiev folks, he's not taking, that's right, he's not taking them into consideration whatsoever. We see the violence against them continue.
Well, I think one of the things, I think it's unfair that he's getting all the credit instead of Jen Psaki, since she obviously had a hand in writing that speech. It was a complete boilerplate repeat of a State Department edict. This is what the U.S. wants for Ukraine. And he, when Putin said to be fair to Putin, I know he's taking a lot of flack right now, but in Paris, he said, well, this is what he says in Paris. Let's hear what he says in Ukraine, in Kiev. And in fact, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
Oh, that's all right. I call him Poroshenko, because Parasha in Russian means like night commode. So you have President Hologram, talking to President Turd Bucket. And what's really happening is the man behind the curtain, Oz, as Obama, is acting as the disembodied voice of empire, and Poroshenko is the water carrier for empire. And they're playing out this scheme that has been on the table for a very long time. I think what is happening on the ground is more important. Remember what Hugo Chavez said, let the dogs of empire bark. That is their job. Crimea is Ukrainian. Assad must go. The Shah is an island of stability in the Middle East. These are all things that various exponents of the empire have said over the years, and they've wound up being a crock of what's in Poroshenko's bucket. It's not the things, we have to be honest, things are going quite poorly on the ground for Kiev, even though it's a horrific war crimes are being committed. You have Poroshenko pretending it would be hours, not weeks. Remember that?
Yep.
They have failed in every aspect of what they're trying to do. And the war crimes that they're committing, the wanton shelling of civilian areas, the strafing from the air of civilian administration, the going into hospitals and executing wounded soldiers, these are all now visible.
Dan, I didn't hear any of that on BBC and CNN. Did you?
Well,
okay, let me go to
I
think that's the answer. Let me go to Mark. Let me go to Mark here in Moscow. Jump in, Mark. You wanted to say something earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was a reference that the speech was lifted from Jen Psaki. But actually, the truth of the matter is that the entire first few lines, the introductory remarks of Poroshenko's speech, were actually literally lifted from an earlier speech from his defeated, also oligarch opponent, Yulia Tymoshenko. They were lines that she delivered at an earlier speech earlier this year, word for word. So that should say something about the quality of, at least of the speechwriters of this new regime in Ukraine. Now, it should be noted that Poroshenko is not some new character on the scene. He is an oligarch. He has made his money as a media baron in chocolate, but also in the Ukrainian arms industry. And his media hold over Channel 5, which he promised he would divest himself of, as well with his other corporate holdings, he has now reversed course on this and says he will keep. Poroshenko has had a position in the governments of the previous, now ousted by the Maidan Putsch government of Yanukovych as head of the National Bank and various other cabinet posts regarding the economy. He held a position, including a foreign minister, under the corrupt Orange Revolution Lukashenko regime, and he also held high government positions under the Kuchma government. So he is a known factor. He has been around for a long time. In fact, the WikiLeaks U.S. State Department cables just a year ago, the United States noting that he was a discredited and oligarch, that there was severe and credible allegations of corruption against him, and this is from U.S. diplomats in the Ukraine.
But that's why he's Washington's man, that's for sure. Vladimir, let me go back to you in Cleveland. Let's talk about right sector. How much does the new president there, how much latitude does he have in policy making? Because there's some really nasty elements that pulled off the coup. Is he beholden to them?
There are some very worrying signs. Already when the coup happened, the oligarchs clearly made a deal to put on board openly or almost openly fascist elements, including the right sector, and they made a deliberate strategic decision, which means the White House, Washington, made the strategic decision to put these elements in control, in charge of all the security apparatus, the military, the police of the Ukrainian state. Which means that although till then their popular support for the right sector was around 1%, the oligarchs and people in Washington thought that these are the best possible people to run the police, the military enforcement, and to be commanders of the unleashed war against all the anti-fascist patriots in Ukraine. And with the election of Poroshenko, this seems to continue, and there is nothing in the news on the horizon that would suggest otherwise. In fact, the right sector just these few days made a declaration that they are indeed closely collaborating with Poroshenko, that they most likely will have yet more important positions in Poroshenko's government, and that the right sector, which essentially has become the National Guard, the most ideologically committed force on the part of the junta that is also responsible for the most of war crimes that are taking place, that this right sector would be president's private army, which means
we're getting close to the break here. Let me go to Daniel here. I mean, who's watching whom here? Because this sounds like a very toxic mixture.
It is the unleashing. I think that what Washington does is keep the hubris alive, just like they do with Al-Qaeda and the Nutters brigades in Syria and everywhere else. They think that they can pull the genie out of the bottle and then put it back at will and direct that anger and vitriol wherever they want, just like they did for 40 years with death squads in Central and South America. There's nothing new here. in terms of that. What I think it's important to point out is that people will, especially in the West, we're talking about breaking into the echo chamber, that, well, you know, it's a Moscow line that these are all fascists and they keep using the word Nazi and blah, 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 blah. And the hard fact is, of course, not everyone in Western Ukraine is a Nazi. Not everyone in Nazi Germany was a Nazi either, by the way. I mean, that's not, you have a tiny group of incredibly influential, armed, and people who have the ear of not only the president, but the CIA and NATO. And the EU seems to be fumbling around in the background, not knowing where their own interests lie.
As usual.
But you're right, it is an incredibly toxic stew, as usual, yeah. Because they believe in plurality.
Right. Mark, let me go to you. I mean, but who has control over whom? I mean, is Poroshenko following them or the other way around? I mean, I want to see where the power balance is.
Okay, well, I think it's exactly that there is a balance and a give and tug. There are reports in the Ukrainian media. It is well known that Poroshenko was the biggest domestic financier of the Euromaidan riots, but it has also been reported that he has been the personal financial patron of the right sector for years. What we've seen is that relationship already intensified. The leader of the right sector, Dmitry Yarosh, came out earlier this week and stated that, as Vladimir said, that the right sector will now be the personal private army of Poroshenko, and that Yarosh has been promised a cabinet position. And Poroshenko has done nothing to discredit these rumors.
All right, gentlemen, we've run out of time here. Let me go to a short break here, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Ukraine. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing the continuing crisis in Ukraine. Okay, I'd like to go back to Vladimir in Cleveland. Vladimir, we have a pretty good idea what this new president wants to do, and he's uncompromising, at least at this stage. It's early days, but his words are very clear. He's not going to compromise. There's no federalization. Dissident voices will not be given any kind of platform. So, Vladimir, my question to you, is it going to work?
Well, it depends what the objective is, and it seems to me that on the part of the White House that is behind Poroshenko, the goal is not stabilization or peace, but a creation of a huge lake or ocean of chaos, instability, mayhem, and destruction that is supposed to engulf eastern Ukraine and ultimately parts of Russia as well. In this respect, I would also like to bring in maybe a little interesting information. There is such a book called The Devil's Guard, which describes an odyssey, bloody odyssey of an SS officer who was a war criminal. He was hired after World War II by the French. He went to Vietnam to do his murderous job, and then he was hired by the US to continue basically on the same job. This book became the most popular book among the US troops in Iraq. And in this book, this former SS officer describes anyone who was on the other side as terrorists. And this is indeed where I think the connection is, that for the Kiev regime, anyone who stands up to Banderism, fascism, the junta, the oligarchs, is a terrorist that needs to be exterminated.
Okay, Daniel, I mean, these types of regimes, they can last a while, but they're quite murderous and they're intolerant. But they do tend to fall apart because it is an ideology that is so intolerant. It can only go on for so long. And I'd like to add that the country's going into economic chaos. I mean, this is another toxic mixture here. But I don't see a fascist or fascistic regime like this being in power for too long, because people like right sector, you can't really have elections because they're not electable, but they do like power.
This is the million-dollar question, Peter. You have Pinochet stayed in power from 1973 until, what, 1990, 1991? You know, it didn't work in Vietnam. It doesn't seem to be working in Syria. It worked great in Libya because they destroyed the entire country. You have, I believe, that the great Achilles heel of this, and I don't just mean the fascistic regime, but the regime change operations that Washington continues to dole out year after year, that if hubris is the great Achilles heel, because if you constantly deny that these people have agency, you know, you can say they're terrorists, you can get all of the media echo chamber to repeat that they're terrorists, but they're not. And you know who knows that more than anyone else? They do. And what they are doing now, the longer it lasts, and it's absolutely disgusting what is being done to these people. It's emotionally very moving. But every second they spend on this kind of terror campaign, they are losing another generation in Donbass. Donbass is permanently out of their control. They despise Kiev, and they are absolutely guaranteeing that Novorossiya will always be that way, and that can't last.
You know, Mark, I agree with what Dan just said there, and this is one of the, this whole program, our viewers should know, was prompted by a message that Dan made on Facebook to me, and he even suggested the panel here. So I thank you very much for that, Dan. But you know, Mark, I mean, you know, when we look at what's going on here, and you and I are very good friends, and we've talked a lot about this for months now. What Dan just said is true. I mean, you know, they can occupy, Kiev can occupy these people, but they will never get their hearts and minds.
Okay, well, there's a lot of things that are being unreported in the Western media, and it is really unconscionable, the blackout that is occurring of what is happening in the eastern Ukraine at this moment. The BBC tried to report, among other news sources, that Poroshenko was reaching out to offer peace. And nothing of the sort is true. The exact opposite. He had the perfect opportunity to try to bring the country together, to make some hard concessions, some compromise. He did nothing of the sort. He has continued. He offered nothing that wasn't the line of this Putsch regime acting government under Chechenov for the last few months. Right. During the inauguration speech, the reports on the ground is that as he was delivering speech, the artillery shelling of civilian areas in Slavyansk actually intensified. The Western media is not reporting that there are airstrikes against civilian areas in eastern Ukraine. They're not reporting that they are using artillery against civilian areas. They're not reporting that they are using Grad rocket launchers against civilian areas. And this is absolutely unconscionable. But we have an interplay here in that while the people of the Donbass are not certainly, you know, they have come to absolutely despise the government that is trying to kill and terrorize them into submission. At the same time, the lack of any noticeable support from Russia is starting to really sow a high level or low level of morale among them. They are being killed. President Putin made a statement where he said that he reserved the right to act to protect the people of East and South Ukraine, and it does not appear, it's certainly not to them, that he is doing so. And right now they are caught between a government in Kiev that is trying to kill them and a government in Moscow that seems to be dithering. It is continuing pragmatically to try to play for peace, but this is not occurring, and it's really caught between a rock and a hard place, the people of East Ukraine.
You know, Vladimir, one of the interesting things, if you know something about Ukraine, and everyone on this program does, one part of Ukraine cannot dominate the other one for very long. And that nothing in the cards now is going to change that. And this is why I keep asking this question, you know, is it going to work? Because historically it has never worked. We all know, rational people know, it's a federalization, decentralization is what is necessary for that country. But the new president and the White House don't seem to know much about history, do they?
I think they believe, actually, in the White House that they are creators of a new world order, of a new world, and it seems to me that they are taking Genesis of the Old Testament literally, which is that before you create a new world, you need to have chaos, and out of chaos, a new order emerges, and then everything will be fine. But first, for that to happen, you need to have bloodshed, chaos, confusion, mayhem, etc. And it seems that one portion of their strategy to win hearts and minds is to break the spirit, to break these hearts and minds into pieces. And that's what they are trying to do. On the other side, there are also people who are zealots and who, as Plato once said in the Republic, once certain people get a taste of blood, something strange, demonic happens to them, and they are lost to humanity. And that's where the right sector and all the other fascist paramilitaries are at this very moment.
Okay, Daniel, but I absolutely agree with what Vladimir said there. But, you know, with this campaign against these people in the east and south of the country, I mean, you're never going to have their hearts and minds again. I mean, too much blood has been spilt, and it's this uncompromising ideology that's in Kiev, which Western media just hates to talk about. I mean, I'm heartbroken reading Western media. That's why I continue on this program to do this topic, because it's a huge blackout, and it's very shameful on top of it. But like, to go back to my point, one part of the country cannot dictate over the other one for very long. It just doesn't work.
Well, I think what the other side of the coin here is in this I like this format because we grant too much space to the shouters and the time wasters. When we have fairly significant disagreements even in our own camp. And I would, if I can summarize what Mark and Vladimir might say, is that that's not actually historically true. There are lots of societies where repression and horror and breaking the hearts and minds of the people have held regimes in power for quite a long time. And I think that they think that we're close to that. I disagree. I think that there is something happening not just in the East. Now, one of the things that went unreported, along with everything else in the Western media, was that only a few blocks away from the glorious inauguration, right when that young soldier was dropping his rifle and fainting to the ground, ominously enough, was a car bomb exploded. Right near the presidential palace, so it's right in downtown Kiev. You also have parents of potential recruits blocking the roads with trees in Lvov. I mean, this is the center of ethno-nationalism in Ukraine. The longer that you can keep relying on only the crazies, the worse the regular people will see them, because if you have a massive Russian intervention, you will inflame the anti-Russian sentiments, which are long-standing in the western regions of the country and even in some parts of Donbass. I don't want to be glib about it at all, and I know that these are horrific things happening, but I think there's a rock and a hard place for Moscow as well. And I really think, even though I know they disagree, I think that the point for NATO and Washington is to try to draw Russia into a war so that it can justify Cold War 2.0 and a hot one, as long as we're in the neighborhood.
Okay, Mark, I'll give you the last word. Go ahead.
Okay, what happened also during Poroshenko's speech yesterday that has gone completely unreported in the Western media is that there was an assassination attempt on a leader of the Donetsk Republic, and a successful assassination of another Donetsk Republic parliamentarian, a leader and an assistant. This has gone completely unreported, and this is a clear indication of where Poroshenko intends to go. This is no olive branch, no peace. There will be war. They intend to win by subjugating and terrorizing the people of East Ukraine back into the silence and political apathy that they have lived in under the last 20 years.
Okay, on that, Mark, I'm sorry, on that very depressing note, we've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Cleveland, Boston, and in Moscow. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules.
I love you.